The Sixth Night, from 10 Nights of Dreams, a story for sleep, a 90-minute calm storytelling script for YouTube, quiet tales of Japan. Close your eyes, if you'd like, or simply let your gaze go soft, resting on nothing in particular. Let your body settle wherever you are. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands rest open and still. There is nothing you need to do right now, nothing to hold on to. For the next little while, you are simply here, listening and resting. Tonight, we're going to watch someone work. Not hurried work, not anxious work, not the kind of work that is done against a deadline or under the pressure of someone watching and judging, but the other kind, the kind that is so completely engaged that the person doing it has forgotten to be anywhere else, has forgotten to be anyone other than the work itself, has become, for this hour, simply the chisel moving through the wood and the form emerging from it. This is the sixth night of Natsume Soseki's 10 Nights of Dreams, a dream about a master craftsman who lived in the 12th century and appears, in the dream, in the middle of Meiji-era Tokyo, carving a guardian figure from a block of wood in front of a temple gate, while the people of the modern city gather around and watch. It is a quiet dream, a slow one, a dream about what it means to make something true, to find, inside the raw material of the world, the form that was always there, waiting to be revealed. Breathe in slowly, and let it out. Let the day go. Let the doing go. For the next little while, you are not making anything. You are simply watching, and in the watching, perhaps something will become clear that was not clear before. There was word going around that Unkei was carving a Neo at the gate of Gokokuji. Unkei. The name would have meant something to anyone who heard it. Meant something the way the names of the very great always mean something, even centuries after the person is gone, even to people who have never seen the work firsthand, and know it only as a name attached to a reputation, attached to a quality, attached to a few images held in the memory of a culture. Unkei was the greatest Buddhist sculptor Japan had produced. He lived in the late Heian and early Kamakura periods, the 12th and 13th centuries, at a time when the country was in the middle of one of its great transitions, when the old aristocratic order was giving way to the order of the warrior class, when the culture was shifting from the refinement and the indirection of the Heian court to something more direct, more physical, more interested in power and presence than in the subtle pleasures of a life lived in ceremony. His figures reflected this. The Buddhist sculpture of the Heian period had a particular quality, serene, idealized, remote, the figures of the Bodhisattvas and the Buddhas expressing the qualities of enlightenment and compassion through a beauty that was beyond the human, that had moved past the particular into something more universal and more abstract. Unkei's work was different. His figures were present. They had muscle and weight, and the particular energy of things that are alive and aware. His Neo, his guardian figures, stand at the gates of temples with their mouths open, in the threatening gesture that is meant to frighten away evil, with their bodies twisted in action, with their veins visible in their forearms, and their expressions containing something that is closer to human fury than to divine serenity. They are not idealized. They are real. Or rather, they are more real than real, the way great art is more real than reality. Having distilled from reality, the essence of the thing, and presented it without the accidents and the impurities that reality always contains. And he was here. In the dream, he was here. In Tokyo, in the Meiji era, at the gate of Gokokuji, doing what he had done in the 12th century, carving. The temple gate itself was worth describing. A large red pine stood in front of it, not directly in front, not blocking the view, but to one side, its trunk leaning slightly toward the gate the way old trees lean toward the things they have grown up beside, and its branches extending over the roof of the gate in a way that was neither planned nor accidental, but simply the result of a very long time of a tree being a tree, and a gate being a gate in close proximity to each other. The green of the pine and the red of the gate's lacquer, the deep, built-up red of old lacquer that has had many coats and many years, played against each other in a way that was not something a designer would have planned, but that worked in the way that things work when they have been together long enough to find their relationship. The gate itself was in the style of the Kamakura period. This was strange. Gokokuji is an Edo period temple. It was built in the late 17th century under the 5th Tokugawa shogun, and its gate has no particular connection to the Kamakura period. But in the dream, it looked Kamakura. It had the particular quality of Kamakura architecture, the bracket systems under the eaves, the proportions of the pillars and the roof, the general feeling of something that was built to last and has lasted and has taken on the weight of its own age the way old structures do. The sky above the gate was blue, not the pale, uncertain blue of an overcast day, but a deep, clear blue, the blue of a sky that has decided to be itself completely, without reservation, the blue that in Japanese painting is left largely unpainted, because the particular quality of the sky in Japan is better expressed by the absence of color than by any color that could be put in its place. The pine stood in this blue. The gate stood in this blue. And below the gate, at the threshold, Unkei was working. He was wearing an eboshi, the tall, black, lacquered cap that men of rank wore in the Heian and Kamakura periods, shaped something like an elongated oval, stiff and formal, one of those objects that belong so completely to the period that produced it, that seeing it immediately places you in that period and no other. His robes were the suo, the formal outer garment of the Kamakura period, its colors and cut belonging entirely to a time that was not the Meiji era, in which the people watching him were dressed in their own period's clothes. He was, visually, completely of his time, and yet here he was. He did not acknowledge the crowd. This was the first thing you noticed about him. Not that he was hostile to them, not that he was performing indifference, making a show of not caring in the way that performers sometimes make a show of not caring about their audience. He simply did not notice them. His attention was entirely elsewhere. It was on the wood in front of him, on the block of hinoki cypress, or keyaki zelkova, that was becoming under his tools something that had not existed before in the world of visible things. The mallet moved. The chisel moved. These are the two tools of wood sculpture in Japan. The nomi, the chisel, held in one hand, against the wood, and the kazuchi, the mallet, held in the other hand, and used to drive the chisel. The relationship between the two hands is one of the fundamental relationships in the craft. One hand holding and directing, the other providing force. The work of the sculpture happening at the meeting point of these two functions, at the tip of the chisel where the force from the mallet becomes the mark in the wood. He worked without hesitation. Each stroke of the mallet was placed with certainty, not with the exploratory uncertainty of someone who is trying to find out what the next move should be, but with the assurance of someone who already knows, who has known for a long time, who is not discovering, but revealing. This was what made it impressive to watch. Not the speed, he was not fast exactly. Not the force, the strokes were not violent, they were measured. But the certainty, the complete absence of doubt in each movement, the quality of a person who is doing the thing they were made to do. A crowd had gathered. They were, unmistakably, people of the Meiji era, dressed in the clothing of the late 19th century, which in Japan at that time was a complicated mixture of Western and Japanese styles, each person having resolved the question of which to wear in their own particular way, some entirely Western, some entirely Japanese, some wearing both at once in combinations that were not quite either and were entirely of their moment. They watched, they commented, they offered their assessments of what they were seeing in the way that crowds always offer assessments, loudly, confidently, from positions of certainty about things they do not understand. One man in the crowd attracted attention. He was not educated. This was apparent from his manner and his dress, or rather, from the specific way his dress indicated his position. He had no hat, which in the Meiji era, for an adult man in public, was a marker of a person who was either unaware of, or indifferent to, the conventions of the moment. He was watching the work with intense focus. He said loudly that the figure being carved was the strongest Neo in Japan. He said it with the confidence of a man who has strong opinions about things he has thought about carefully and not very carefully at the same time. The kind of confidence that belongs to people who have not been taught that their opinions might be wrong, and have therefore never considered the possibility that they might be. The crowd around him shifted. Someone else said something. Then, someone else. The commentary continued. The assessments and the counter-assessments, the opinions about the quality of the work and the significance of the subject, and the various things that could be said about a 12th century master carving a guardian figure at the gate of a temple in the middle of the Meiji era, none of which reached the man doing the carving or seemed to interest him at all. Unkei carved. The crowd talked. The pine tree stood in the blue sky above them all. There is a word in Japanese, shokunin, that is often translated as craftsman or artisan, but that carries meanings the translation does not fully convey. A shokunin is not simply a person who makes things. A shokunin is a person who has given their life to making one kind of thing, who has organized their existence around the mastery of a specific craft to a degree that makes the craft inseparable from the person. The shokunin ideal has deep roots in Japanese culture. It appears in the way Japanese crafts are organized, the apprenticeship systems that train people over years and decades before allowing them to work independently, the emphasis on refinement of technique rather than innovation, the understanding that mastery is not arrived at quickly, but accumulated slowly through repetition and attention, and the gradual wearing away of everything in the work that is not necessary. A sword polisher in Japan may spend years learning to polish before they are trusted with a blade of value. A lacquer artist may spend years applying the early layers of a piece, the layers that will never be seen, before they are allowed to work on the surfaces that the finished object will show. The invisible work is not preliminary, it is the foundation, and the quality of the foundation determines everything that is built on it. Unkei was the product of this system. He had begun his training as a child, in his father's workshop, in the presence of the tools and the materials, and the specific quality of attention that the work required, and had continued for decades, working first as an apprentice, then as a collaborator, then as a master, each stage building on the one before it, each year adding to the accumulated knowledge that made possible the work that the people of Meiji Tokyo were watching at the gate. The crowd saw the certainty. They saw the mallet moving without hesitation, and the chisel biting cleanly into the wood, and the form emerging with what appeared to be ease. They did not see, could not see, the decades that produced the ease. The ease is the product of the difficulty. The certainty is the product of the uncertainty that came before it, the years of not knowing, of being wrong, of doing the thing incorrectly, until the incorrectness was gradually replaced by something more correct, until the hand learned what the mind already knew, until the knowledge became physical, and the physical became automatic, and the automatic became what looks, from the outside, like a gift. It is not a gift. It is the residue of time. The narrator had been watching for some time when he said, almost to himself, that it was remarkable the way Unkei could use the chisel so freely, with such apparent ease, and still produce exactly the eyebrows and the nose he wanted. He was not saying this as a criticism or as praise. He was saying it as an observation, as a person says something when the thing in front of them is striking enough to require some kind of spoken response, when the silence of mere watching is not quite sufficient. A young man standing near him turned. He was younger than the narrator, young enough that the narrator later described him in a way that indicated youth without being more specific, the kind of description that suggests someone who has not yet arrived at the settled quality of a person who has decided what they are. He said, "It is not the chisel that makes the eyebrows and the nose." He said, "Those eyebrows and that nose are already there?" Side Ida-wool wood. Unkei is simply using the chisel to uncover them. It is the same as digging a stone out of the earth. It is impossible to go wrong. The narrator considered this. It was the kind of statement that sounds simple and is actually not simple. The kind of statement that you can hear and nod at and feel you have understood, and then, an hour later, find still moving through your thoughts, shifting and turning, revealing new aspects of what it might mean. The eyebrows and the nose are already there. The work of the sculptor is not to create, but to find, not to impose a form on the material, but to remove what is hiding the form that the material already contains. He looked at Unkei again, at the certainty in the movements, at the absence of hesitation. If it was true that the form was already there, if the chisel was only uncovering something that existed rather than creating something that did not, then the certainty made sense. You could move without doubt if you were finding rather than inventing, if you knew that what you were looking for was already there, already real, simply waiting to be seen. The young man's words stayed with him. The eyebrows and the nose are already there. He turned this over as he watched, not with the part of the mind that analyzes, not pulling it apart to examine its components, but in the slower way of ideas that are felt rather than thought, that you carry with you and let settle and return to and find, on returning, slightly changed, slightly more understood, the way a path through a landscape looks different in different lights, without itself having changed. What does it mean for something to already be there? A form in the wood. The wood has not been shaped into the form yet. The form is not visible. If you look at the unworked block, you see only the block, the grain, the surface, the dimensions of the raw material. And yet the young man says the form is there. In what sense? In the sense that the material is capable of becoming the form, that the specific density and grain and dimension of this piece of wood make it possible for this form to exist in it in a way that it would not be possible in a piece of material with different properties. The sculptor sees this not because they have supernatural vision, not because they can literally see the finished figure inside the unworked block, but because they have spent long enough looking at wood and working with wood and seeing what wood can do that they have developed a kind of prediction. This wood, worked in this way, will yield this. The form is there in the sense that the conditions for the form are there, that the raw material is oriented in the direction of the form, is capable of becoming it, is in some sense waiting for the work that will make it actual. He thought about this as he watched the mallet and the chisel. He thought, is there something in me that is waiting in this way? Some form that the conditions of my life have made possible, that is buried in the material of who I am, that is waiting for the work that will reveal it? He did not answer this question. In the dream, it remained a question, present, alive, a question that the watching had produced, and that the watching continued to hold without resolving. The mallet struck, the chisel moved, a small curl of wood fell. 5. The Return. He watched for a long time after that. The crowd came and went, people arriving to look, staying for a while, making their assessments, drifting away, but he stayed. Something had shifted in how he was watching. Before the young man's words, he had been watching the way people watch impressive things, with admiration and curiosity, with a vague desire to understand how the impressive thing was done. After the young man's words, he was watching differently. He was watching for the form in the wood. The block of wood that Unkei was working from was large enough to contain a human-scale figure, which is to say, large enough that its dimensions were those of a large person standing, something in the range of 5 or 6 feet, in the dimension that would become the height of the figure. From where the narrator stood, he could see the block in its partly worked state, partly still the raw surface of the wood, with the marks of the saw that had cut it from the larger piece, and partly already worked, the chisel having removed material in some areas to reveal the beginning of the form. The form was there, not completely, not all of it was visible yet, but enough to see the direction, to see what the block was becoming, to see the emerging figure in the way that you see a face emerging from the darkness as your eyes adjust to a dim room. The Neo, the guardian figure, was a body in movement, a body caught in the act of force, of presence, of the kind of energy that is meant to stop evil at the gate, simply by being what it is, simply by embodying a quality of rightness and power so completely that nothing that does not belong can pass. Unkei worked, the mallet struck, the chisel moved, a small curl of wood fell to the ground, and somewhere inside the decreasing bulk of the block, the Neo became slightly more visible, slightly more itself, slightly closer to the surface, slightly less buried in what had always been simply the material that surrounded it. There was a sound. Of course there was a sound. Carving is not silent. But the particular quality of this sound was worth attending to. The mallet against the handle of the chisel made a particular tone, not a harsh sound, not the crack of wood splitting, not the violence of force against material, but a considered, measured sound, the sound of something applied with precision, the sound of exactly as much force as is needed and not 1 unit more. This is one of the things that distinguishes a master craftsman from a beginner, the quality of the sound. A beginner working in wood produces a sound that is ragged and variable, too much force here, too little there, the mallet landing at wrong angles, the chisel moving against the grain when it should be moving with it, the results audible in the inconsistency of the sound before they are visible in the inconsistency of the mark. A master working in wood produces a sound that is even, each stroke the right force, each landing at the right angle, the mallet and the chisel working together as smoothly as 2 hands, doing a task each has done 10,000 times. Unkei's sound was even. It had a rhythm to it, not a strict metrical rhythm, not the regular beat of a machine, but the rhythm of a living process, the rhythm of breathing, of thought turned into action, of a person moving through a task that has become, through long practice, as natural as walking. The rhythm of the mallet, the pause, the repositioning of the chisel, the rhythm of the mallet again. This sequence, repeated, with variations that were not randomness, but response, adjustments to what each previous stroke had revealed, each movement informed by all the movements before it. The wood fell, small pieces, thin pieces, curling as they fell, catching the light briefly before settling on the ground. The ground around Unkei's feet was covered with these curls, the material that had been removed, the wood that was not the Neo, the everything that had to be taken away before the thing itself could appear. There was something beautiful about them, about the accumulation of discarded material, the growing evidence of work done. Each curl was proof of a stroke. Each stroke was a decision. Each decision was the product of the seeing that came before it, the seeing that could identify what needed to be removed and what needed to stay. Let us stay for a moment with Unkei, not as the figure in the dream, but as the historical person, the person who actually lived in the late 12th and early 13th centuries and made the things he made. He was born into a family of sculptors. His father was Kokei, also a significant sculptor, also associated with the revival of Buddhist sculpture that occurred in the Kamakura period, after the destruction of many of the great Nara temples in the wars that ended the Heian era. He would have learned his craft from his father, learned it the way craft is learned when it is passed down within a family, not as an abstract principle, but as a practice, as a set of specific habits of hand and eye that are transmitted through demonstration and repetition, rather than through instruction, through thousands of hours of watching someone who knows how to do the thing, and then trying to do the thing yourself and being corrected and trying again. The tools he used were the tools that Buddhist sculptors had used in Japan for several centuries before him. The same chisels, the same mallets, the same fundamental approach of removing material from a block to reveal the form within. The technique he worked in, Yosegi Zukuri, the joined wood technique, was one that had been developed in the Heian period, and that he inherited and mastered and used to produce figures of extraordinary complexity and presence. In this technique, the figure is not carved from a single block, but assembled from many pieces of wood, each piece carved separately, and then joined to the others, a technique that allows for larger and more complex figures than could be produced from a single block, and that also allows the inside of the figure to be hollow, which reduces the risk of cracking as the wood changes with temperature and humidity. His most famous work, the pair of Neo, the Guardian Kings, at the south gate of Todaiji in Nara, was made in 1203, in collaboration with his colleague Kaike and a team of other sculptors. Each figure is over 8 meters tall. They were made, according to the records, in 70 days, an extraordinarily compressed period for work of this scale, which suggests either that the records are wrong or that Unkei and his team worked with a focus and an efficiency that we can barely imagine from the outside. The figures stand in the gate now, more than 800 years later, still doing what they were made to do, guarding the entrance, presence in wood, the form that was in the wood made visible and permanent and lasting. Let us consider the wood. In Japanese Buddhist sculpture, the choice of wood has always mattered. The most commonly used wood is hinoki, Japanese cypress, which has been the preferred material for temple buildings and religious objects for well over 1,000 years. Hinoki has qualities that recommend it for this kind of work. It is straight-grained. The fibers run consistently along the length of the tree, which means that the wood responds predictably to the tool, splitting and carving in ways that the craftsman can anticipate and work with rather than against. It has a fine, even texture. The cells that make up the wood are small and regular, which allows for crisp detail at a scale that coarser-grained woods cannot support. It is resistant to rot and insects, a quality that has allowed objects made from hinoki to survive for centuries, including the very Neo at Todaiji that Unkei made in 1203 and that still stand in their gate. And it has a smell. The smell of hinoki is one of those smells that is difficult to describe without reference to the other things it resembles. Clean and slightly sweet, with a quality of freshness that is botanical, the smell of a living tree expressed in the cut surface of a dead one. When the chisel moves through hinoki, a small amount of the smell is released. The wood cells are broken, and what was held inside them is briefly present in the air. So the smell of the carving was part of the experience of watching. The smell of hinoki, and the sound of the mallet, and the sight of the curls falling to the ground all arriving together, a complete sensory account of the work being done. The block Unkei was working with had its own history before him. The tree that became this block had grown somewhere, in the mountains most likely, where the best hinoki comes from, where the trees grow slowly in poor soil and produce wood that is denser and tighter than the wood of trees grown in richer conditions, wood that reflects in its grain the patience of a slow growing. The tree had been cut, the wood had been transported, it had been seasoned, allowed to dry slowly, in conditions designed to minimize the cracking that occurs when wood dries too quickly, for a period of years. All of this before it became the block that Unkei was working with. All of this before the first stroke of the chisel that was revealing what had been waiting through all of that time. But in the dream, he was here, in Meiji, Tokyo, and this matters. The fact that it was Meiji, the fact that the crowd watching him was the crowd of the modern era, the fact that the dream placed this figure of ancient craft in the middle of the most aggressively changing period in Japanese history. The Meiji era began in 1868. In the years before it, Japan had been closed to the world for more than 2 centuries. The policy of Sakoku, the closed country, had kept the country's ports and borders largely sealed and had produced a particular kind of society turned inward, developing its own forms and its own aesthetics and its own way of being without the continuous pressure and influence of the outside world. In 1853, American warships appeared in Tokyo Bay. The world outside the sealed country had changed enormously in the 2 centuries of Japan's self-imposed isolation, had industrialized, had developed technologies of steel and steam that made the warships in the harbor representations of a power that Japan, as it then existed, could not match. What followed was, by any measure, one of the most rapid transformations in the history of any country. Within a generation, within the lifetime of many people who had been born into the old Japan, the country acquired railways and telegraphs and newspapers, Western-style military forces, Western-style governmental structures, Western-style universities, Western medicine, Western clothing for formal occasions, Western architectural styles for official buildings. The old forms remained. They did not disappear. But they were now in a different relationship to the world they existed in, a world that was increasingly organized around different principles, different technologies, different ideas about what was valuable and what was not. Natsume Soseki lived through this. He was born in 1867, the year before the Meiji era began, and he died in 1916, having spent his entire life inside the transformation. He spent 2 years in England, studying English literature, and came back to Japan with a permanent case of what he called Jinshu Teki Jiga no Kakuritsu, the establishment of a racial self, a cultural identity, the question of what it meant to be Japanese in a world that was increasingly asking Japan to be something else. The Sixth Night is, among other things, an expression of this question. The Neo buried in the wood. Is it there in Meiji wood? Is it still findable, still revealable in the material of this changed world? Or is it only there in wood from another time, in the material of a culture that has not yet been asked to be something other than itself? The Neo, The name comes from the Sanskrit Dvarapala, the gate guardian, the figure that stands at the entrance to a sacred space and protects it from what should not enter. In Japan, they are also called Kongorikishi, the Vajra strength warriors, and they are almost always found in pairs, one on each side of the gate, their bodies in complementary postures, their mouths in complementary positions, one with the mouth open, forming the sound ah, the first sound of the Sanskrit alphabet, the beginning, and one with the mouth closed, forming the sound un, the last sound, the ending, the two together forming the range of all sound, the whole of what can be expressed. They are not gentle figures. Unlike the bodhisattvas, the compassionate ones, the helpers and the healers whose expressions carry the quality of benevolent attention, the Neo are ferocious. Their bodies are twisted with the energy of force. Their muscles are defined and prominent, the veins visible, the bodies doing work, straining against something even in the stillness of the sculpture. Their expressions are threatening, the brows lowered, the eyes wide and intense, the mouths set in the grimace of concentrated effort or the shout of warning. They are, in their essence, boundaries made visible, the point at which the sacred space announces itself and announces the conditions of entry. In the dream, Unkei was carving one of these, a body made of wood that was meant to embody force and permanence and the particular quality of a threshold, of a thing that stands between what belongs inside and what belongs outside, between what is sacred and what is ordinary, between what is allowed to enter and what is not. The wood had this in it, not because wood is magical, not because the material contained the spirit through any supernatural mechanism, but because a person who had spent a lifetime understanding what this figure was, and what it meant, and how it needed to be embodied in a specific material, at a specific scale for a specific place, that person could see in the wood the specific configuration of grain and density and proportion that would allow the thing to exist in the way it needed to exist. The form was there, in the sense that the conditions for the form were there, that the material was capable of becoming the form was there, and Unkei was finding it. He went home. The crowd was still there when he left, still watching, still commenting, still offering their assessments into the air around the silent sculptor, but he had seen enough, or thought he had seen enough, or felt the desire to try the thing for himself strongly enough that staying to watch was no longer satisfying. He found wood. He had wood at home. There is wood in many houses, wood stored for fuel, wood in various stages of being one thing or another, wood that has been cut and is waiting for the purpose that will eventually claim it. He picked up a piece. He found tools, a chisel, the same tool in principle as what he had watched Unkei use, though not the same tool in quality or in the specific dimensions and grinds that a craftsman develops over years for their particular way of working. He held the chisel against the wood, he raised the mallet, he said to himself, as the young man had said, the form is there. The Neo is buried in this wood. I am not creating. I am finding. He struck. The chisel moved into the wood, not smoothly, not in the way he had watched Unkei's chisel move, but with a slight catching and dragging of a tool in hands that do not yet know the exact angle and pressure and speed that produce the clean cut. He adjusted his grip. He tried again. The wood gave way. A small piece fell. He looked at what remained. There was no Neo visible. There was only the mark of the chisel, a gouge, a divot, a place where material had been removed without revealing anything in particular, except the raw surface beneath. He tried again, and again. He worked through the pile of wood, piece after piece, looking for the figure that was supposed to be there, for the form that was waiting to be found, for the Neo that the young man had said was buried in every piece of wood. Piece after piece, the result was the same. Marks of the chisel, raw surface beneath, no form emerging, no figure finding itself in the revealing. The afternoon light changed as the watching continued. The light that had been high and direct in the middle of the day became longer and more angled as the afternoon advanced. The light of later afternoon, which in Japan in early autumn has a particular quality of warmth and length, the sun lowering and the shadows extending, and everything it touches taking on a tone that is slightly different from its midday tone, slightly richer, slightly more invested in the surfaces it illuminates. The gate caught this light, the red lacquer, which in the direct light of midday had a certain flatness to it, the color present but not deeply expressed. In the angled afternoon light began to glow. Old lacquer has this quality. It stores light in its many layers, and returns, it transformed, the color deepening as the angle of the light changes, becoming more itself, more completely red, in the kind of light that shows things at their fullest. The pine tree caught this light too, its needles turning from their daytime green to a green that had more warmth in it, a green that the low sun was pulling toward gold without quite completing the transformation. Unkei worked in this light. He had been working all day, or so it seemed, and the afternoon had not slowed him. The mallet still struck with the same force. The chisel still moved with the same certainty. The curls still fell in the same patient accumulation, and the figure in the wood, the Neo that was being revealed, was further along than it had been in the morning. Not finished, not nearly finished, but further. The outline of the shoulders was visible, the beginning of the posture, the particular twist of the torso that the warrior stance requires, was legible in the remaining wood. The face was not yet there. The detail was not yet there. The specific expressions of the eyes and the brows and the mouth that would make this particular Neo different from all other Neo had not yet emerged. But they were coming. They were in there, and the afternoon light lay across the partly revealed form in a way that was not incidental, that seemed to be part of the revealing, the light finding the form even before the chisel had finished uncovering it. And then he understood, not all at once, not in the sudden flash that the word understanding sometimes implies, but in the slower way of things that arrive when you stop pushing toward them, when you let go of the effort and find the thing already there in the space that the effort was filling. The Neo was not in the Meiji wood, not because the wood was bad, not because the material itself was inferior, but because the relationship between the craftsman and the material was not the relationship that Unkei had. Unkei knew where to look. He had spent a lifetime learning to see what was already in the wood, not as a mystical ability, not as a gift that appeared fully formed, but as a skill developed over years, over thousands of hours of practice, over the gradual accumulation of knowing what good wood feels like under the tool, and what a form looks like when it first begins to emerge, and how much to take and when to stop, and where the line is between revealing and destroying. The Meiji person could not see what was in the wood, not because it was not there, but because he had not yet developed the eyes to see it. He had the concept. The young man had given him the concept, the beautiful idea that the form was already present, waiting. But the concept without the skill was not sufficient. You cannot uncover what you cannot see. You cannot reveal what you have not learned to look for. And then, below this, a further understanding, slower and more difficult. Perhaps the wood itself was different. Not inferior, not worse, but different. The wood of the Meiji era had grown in a different world, a world that was changing faster than wood changes, a world that was being asked to be many things at once and had not yet settled into knowing what it was. And if the Neo is not a shape imposed on the material, but something that is genuinely present in it, something that the material itself contains by virtue of what it is, then perhaps the Neo that can be found in Meiji wood is not the same Neo that was buried in the wood of the Kamakura era. Perhaps what is buried in the Meiji wood is something that has not yet been found, not because the skill to find it is lacking, but because the thing itself has not yet fully arrived, is still forming, is still in the process of becoming what it will eventually be. And with this understanding, the last part of the dream's meaning arrived. Why Unkei was still alive. Unkei was still alive, was working, in the dream, in Meiji Tokyo, because what he embodied could not be replaced. Not because he was the only person with his skill. There were other great sculptors. There had been great sculptors after him. The tradition had continued. But because what he had, the specific combination of deep skill and a particular relationship to the material, and a particular understanding of what the material contained, that combination existed in him in a form that the changed world had not yet produced in anyone else. The Meiji era had produced many things. It had produced writers and scholars and politicians and engineers and industrialists and people of all kinds who were doing the work of the new era with the energy and the intelligence that the new era required. But the specific kind of vision that Unkei had, the ability to see what was genuinely present in the material of a culture and to bring it to the surface with precision and certainty. That was not something the new era had yet found the conditions to produce, not because the new era was inferior, but because this particular kind of seeing requires a particular kind of stability, a particular kind of settled knowing about what the material is, and the Meiji era was not stable. It was in the middle of becoming, and you cannot see clearly what is buried in something that is still becoming itself. So Unkei continued. In the dream, in the logic of dreams, this made perfect sense. He continued because the work was not finished. He continued because what he was doing was still needed. He continued because the figures buried in the wood still needed to be found, and he was still the person who knew how to find them. Let it all soften now. The temple gate and the red pine against the blue sky, the crowd of Meiji people in their complicated clothing, the master craftsman in his ancient robes working without hurry and without doubt, the mallet and the chisel and the small curls of wood falling to the ground. The young man's words, the eyebrows and the nose are already there, buried in the wood. It is only a matter of finding them, of removing what is in the way, the pile of wood at home that yielded nothing, not because there was nothing in it, but because the eyes that were looking had not yet learned to see. Let it dissolve gently, the way the crowd dispersed as the afternoon went on, moving away in ones and twos, back to the city, back to the Meiji streets, leaving the craftsman alone at the gate in the long light of the late afternoon, still working, still finding, still bringing to the surface what had always been there. There is something in the stream for sleep. The quality of Unkei's work, that quality of complete absorption, of a person so entirely present to what they are doing that nothing else exists, is close to the quality of sleep itself. In sleep, as in that kind of work, the usual business of the mind, the planning and the worrying and the replaying and the anticipating, becomes quiet. Something else takes over. Something that knows what it is doing without needing to think about it, that moves with certainty through the material of the night, finding the rest that is buried there, the restoration that is buried there, the particular quality of being that sleep uncovers in the person who gives themselves to it. The Neo is buried in the wood of this night. You do not need to find it. You do not need to look for it. You only need to stop taking material away and let the night do what the night does. Let it work on you with the patience and the certainty of someone who knows exactly what is there. There is nothing left to hold tonight. You are warm and you are still and you are exactly where you should be. Let your breathing slow. Let the quiet take you. Somewhere at the gate of a temple, the craftsman is still working, unhurried, certain, finding what has always been there. Rest well. Sleep well. Good night.